Hello there, and welcome to the Missiongathering Christian Church Disciples of Christ podcast. I know if you just heard Christian Church, you almost clicked away, but maybe you can stay, and I get it. The words have baggage, and believe me, we know. That's actually kind of why we're here and doing this podcast. Because Mission Gathering is a community that is daring to tell the truth about power and daring even to believe that love is stronger than the powers of empire. This season, this Lenten season, we're in a series called Unlearning Empire. And here's what that means. It means we're naming honestly out loud without flinching everything that has shaped us. The stories we inherited about who has worth, and who doesn't. The myths that told us scarcity is just the way it is, that violence is normal, that some lives matter more than others, that silence is safer than truth, that this is just how the world works and will always work. We've absorbed those stories. They're in us whether we choose them or not. Empire doesn't ask us for consent, it just teaches us this. So we bring all of it here because God doesn't meet you in your obedience to unjust systems. God meets you in the scared, uncomfortable, necessary work of unlearning what's been binding you, what's been holding you back. And when we say everyone is welcome here, we really mean it. It's not as a slogan, it's as a commitment. If you're Black, brown, Asian, indigenous, or white, if you're straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, queer, trans, non-binary, intersex, or questioning, if you are partnered, single, divorced, polyamorous, or still figuring it out, or maybe it's just complicated, if you are housed or unhoused, neurodivergent or neurotypical, disabled or chronically ill, thriving, or just absolutely exhausted, if you grew up in a church, if you were pushed out of church, if you were taught that God looked nothing like you, if you are listening to this today with a deep faith, a restless doubt, a righteous anger, or just enough energy to press play, you are welcome here, friend. Fully, joyfully, without any asterisks. Because here's what we believe. Empire loses its grip when people choose truth over denial, relationship over domination, abundance over fear, love over control. We're not here to rehearse the stories that have harmed us. We're here to practice a different way, to unlearn what empire taught us about God, about each other, and about ourselves, and to remember what love has been saying this whole time underneath all of that noise. So if you're willing to keep going, to join us, bring your whole self, bring your questions, bring your resistance, bring your grief, your anger, and your hope, bring your tenderness, bring the parts of you that got disciplined into silence, bring the parts that are still learning how to trust. This is a space where God is already at work in acts of service that look like power turned upside down, in communities that choose care over calculation, and in every single moment someone refuses to look away and instead chooses to love more deeply. Welcome to Mission Gathering. Welcome to Unlearning Empire, and welcome to a community where empire does not get given the final word because love gets the final word.
Hey, there. Let me ask you something. Have you ever survived something and then realized surviving wasn't the same as being free? Like you made it through. You are technically okay. You're breathing, you're walking around, you're showing up, you're doing the thing. But something, it still feels wrapped around you. Maybe it's an old grief or an old shame or old ways of thinking that have followed you out of the worst seasons of your life to make you feel like you actually never left. So that's where we're going today. I'm going to talk to you about a story from the Bible. And before you tap out, just hear me out for 30 seconds. Because this isn't what you think it's going to be. This story is about a man named Lazarus. He dies. Jesus brings him back to life, and most people think that's where the story ends.
But it doesn't.
And the part most people skip over, I think, is the part that's actually for us. So stay with me as we go into our next episode of Unlearning Empire here at Mission Gathering. Okay, so resurrection. When most people hear that word, even people who grew up in church, even people who didn't, there's like a vibe associated with it, right? Like power, speed, instant transformation. Like one moment everything is broken, and the next moment everything is fixed. It's dramatic music, cue the credit roll. I think that's what we want, right? We want resurrection to feel like a plot twist, like a moment in the movie where the hero gets back up and the whole tide turns in like 30 seconds. And honestly, that's kind of how the story of Lazarus gets told too. Guy dies, Jesus shows up, boom, miracle, done. But here's what's actually happening in John chapter 11, if you slow it down. Lazarus gets sick. His sisters, Mary and Martha, they send a message to Jesus. The message is basically, hey, the person you love is dying. We need you here. And Jesus doesn't come. He waits 2 whole days. By the time Jesus finally shows up in their town, a town called Bethany, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. 4 days. The funeral has happened. The neighbors are already going over at the house. The casseroles have already been dropped off, or whatever the first century version of a casserole was. Grief has already moved in and unpacked its bags. I think that it's important because what this story is telling us right from the start is resurrection doesn't always show up before death. Sometimes it comes after. Sometimes it comes after you've already lost the thing. After the relationship is already over. After the job is already gone. After the version of yourself you thought you'd always be has already disappeared. There's a theologian named James Cone. We talk about him a lot. If you don't know his work, it's worth looking up. But he wrote something to stay with me. He said, resurrection means God's liberation is stronger than the power of death. But he was also really careful to say resurrection is not magic. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't pretend suffering didn't occur. It doesn't show up before the hard part and skip you past it. Resurrection happens inside history, inside real communities, inside real grief. Which means, and this is where I want us to start, resurrection might look a lot less like a plot twist and more like a long, slow, painful process that happens with other people. And having that reframe changed everything for me. So Jesus arrives at Bethany, right? Back to the story. And the house is full. And I want you to picture this for a second, right? In that culture, grief was communal. Like you didn't just cry alone in your room. The whole community showed up. Neighbors, relatives, friends, all of them sitting in the house, crying together, mourning together. And Martha, one of the sisters, she hears Jesus is coming and she goes out to meet him even before he gets to the house. And what she says is one of the most honest things anyone says to God in the entire Bible. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. 6 words. If you had been here. And then her sister Mary shows up and says the exact same thing. Lord, if you had been here. Now, this is really important. Jesus doesn't correct them. He doesn't say to them, hey, let's remember God's ways are higher than our ways. He doesn't just say it's part of the plan. He doesn't say your faith isn't strong enough. He just receives it. He takes it. He lets them say the hard thing. Think about how many of us have been trained to clean up grief before we bring it to God or before we bring it to community. Like, we need to process it first, package it into something presentable, and add a hopeful ending to it before we share it out loud. But we see these two saints, Mary and Martha, don't do that. They walk up to Jesus with their raw, unprocessed, messy grief, and they basically say, you weren't there and it hurt. There's a scholar whose name was Walter Brueggemann. He's recently passed, but he's written a lot about the Psalms, about lament. And he says something that hit me really differently as I read this story. He says, lament is faith refusing to settle for the way things are. Think about that. Lament isn't doubt. Lament isn't giving up on God. Lament is actually a really fierce act of faith. Because you're saying things are not the way they're supposed to be, and I believe they could be different. If you've ever cried out to God and wondered if there was something wrong or weak or not faithful enough, I really need you to hear this. Honest grief brought to God is one of the most faithful things human beings can do. You're not supposed to perform okayness. You're not supposed to pretend. Bring the real thing. And here's what this story tells us. God can handle it. All right, back to the story. So Jesus is at the house now. People are weeping. The grief is thick, like super thick. The text says something that honestly, every time I come back to it, it just gets me. Jesus sees the grief. He sees the tears, and he sees the community in mourning, and he weeps. That's it. John 11:35, 2 words. Jesus wept. It's literally the shortest verse in the Bible. I've heard it used as a trivia question, like, for as long as I can remember. What's the shortest verse in the Bible, kids? I think that's kind of a tragedy. Because that trivia framing makes us skip past what might be the most important moment in the story. Jesus weeps. He doesn't immediately pivot to miracle. He doesn't give a speech about how death isn't real. He doesn't remind everyone that he's about to fix it, so there's no need to cry. He just cries with them. He weeps with them. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about what it means that God, in the person of Jesus, looks at human grief and responds the way he does. The response isn't to explain or erase it or to speed past it. The response is to deeply feel it. So there's this philosopher named Nicholas Wolterstorff, right? And he lost his son in a mountain climbing accident. And he wrote an incredibly honest book about grief. And in it, he says, the wounds of grief are the price of love. The wounds of grief are the price of love. I mean, that's it, isn't it? That's the whole thing. You don't grieve things that you didn't love. You don't weep for things that didn't matter. When something breaks you open, that's the evidence of how deeply you cared. And if Jesus weeps, then tears are not a sign that your faith is failing. Tears are a sign that love is still alive in you.
I want to say something to you right now, you who are listening, right? If you're going through a hard season, you don't have to be okay yet. You don't have to have a hopeful ending ready. Sometimes the most faithful thing, the most loving thing you can do for someone in pain, or the honest thing you can do with your own pain, is just stay. Stay in it. Stay with people in it. Don't rush to fix it. Don't rush to explain. Just stay long enough for something new to begin. Okay, so eventually Jesus, we don't know if he stopped weeping, but he goes outside, right? He goes towards the tomb. It's a cave, a big stone rolled across the entrance, right? Classic ancient Palestinian burial situation. And Jesus says something that surprises me every time. He doesn't do the miracle first. He turns to the people standing around and he says, "Take away the stone." And Martha, like, bless her heart, says one of the craziest things, but like one of the things that, like, I think is the most human, right? She says, "Lord, it's been 4 days. There's going to be a smell." If you grew up with the King James Bible version of this, it says, "Lord, he stinketh," which is scripture being really, as silly and as funny as that can be to read out loud. It's scripture being really honest about the reality of death. Like, there's no sanitizing this. Lazarus has been dead in a tomb for 4 days in the Middle East, and it's not going to be pleasant. But Jesus says, move the stone anyway. And I think there's something in this small moment that gets overlooked. Before the miracle, there's a task that belongs to the people, right? Before Jesus does the resurrection, there's something that the people have to do. They have to move the stone. Resurrection required human participation before the divine act happened. Someone had to do something that probably felt pointless. Moving a stone in front of a tomb that had been sealed for 4 days before the miracle could happen. And I think about how many things in our lives are like that. There's a move the stone moment before every breakthrough. A reach out to someone moment. A go to therapy, please go to therapy moment. A admit I need help moment. A stop pretending everything is fine moment. Small, uncomfortable, maybe even a little embarrassing, but the stone doesn't move by itself. Someone has to decide that just because it looks like it's over doesn't mean it's over. Someone has to be willing to do the thing that feels pointless. Because resurrection, real resurrection, often brings and begins with small acts of courage by someone who dares to believe the story isn't finished. So the stones rolled away, and then Jesus calls out into the darkness, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus does. He walks or like hops out of the tomb alive. And there's a moment in the story I want to spend the most time on, because this is the moment people skip, because Lazarus walks or hops out of the tomb still in his grave clothes, right? He's still wrapped up in the burial cloths. They're still on him. He's still bound hand and foot. His face is still wrapped. He's alive, but he's not yet free. He's breathing. He's standing. He survived. Or better yet, he's been revived. But he can't really move yet. He can't fully live yet. And here's what I keep coming back to as I read and reread this story. This is the experience of so many people. You've survived something, the grief, the trauma, the hard season, the thing that almost took you out. Or maybe it's a bunch of
little awful things that piled up over the years, and you're out of the tomb that those things were in, that you were in with, the things that were holding you down, the things that made you feel dead inside. And you're technically okay. But you're still wrapped up in the stuff from before. Old patterns, old wounds, old cycles, old ways of surviving that made sense in the tomb, but don't serve you outside of it. The grief that you never fully processed, the shame that's still whispering, the ways you learned to protect yourself that are now keeping you from fully living. You survived. You're out. But some part of you is still in those grave clothes. I don't say that to be depressing. I say it because I think the church, and honestly, a lot of different spaces, have taught us to celebrate the survival and skip past the unbinding. Like, you made it out. Great. Now just be grateful and move on. But Lazarus couldn't move yet. He was still wrapped. And the story doesn't pretend otherwise. Okay, so here's the moment, right? This is the line in the story that I think is the whole point. Jesus looks at the crowd, the same crowd that was weeping with him 10 minutes ago. The neighbors and friends, the community, all of those people. And he says to them, unbind him and let him go. I think it's important that Jesus does not remove the grave clothes. Jesus does not unbind him, the community does. Read that again. Jesus performs the miracle of life. But the work of freedom, that gets assigned to the community of people around him. You unbind him. Not a private spiritual act, not something Lazarus does for himself alone. You, the community, you participate in this. Because I've been thinking about what it means that Jesus looked at the crowd in that moment. People who had just witnessed the most dramatic miracle of their life. And his first instruction was community action. Not go tell everyone what you saw. Not let Lazarus rest. Unbind him. You're needed for part of this. There's a quote from community organizer Ella Baker. She was the foundational figure in the civil rights movement, and she doesn't nearly get enough credit for all of the work that she did within that movement. And she said, strong people don't need strong leaders. What she meant was movements happen when communities realize that liberation is everybody's work. It doesn't belong to one charismatic person at the front. It belongs to everyone. And Jesus right here in this moment is saying the same thing. The miracle happened. Life returned. But freedom requires the community. Which means, and I really want you to sit with this, resurrection is never a solo act. Not for Lazarus, not for us, not for anyone. You need people, you need community to help unbind you. And sometimes, better yet, oftentimes, you are called into helping unbind someone else. So I want to get really practical here for a minute. Because this is a podcast, it's not a straight up sermon, and I don't want you just to leave with your beautiful idea and no landing strip. There are people in your life right now who are out of the tomb. They survived the thing, but they're still wrapped. Maybe it's a friend who got through the depression but is still isolated. Still can't quite ask for help. Still wearing the patterns that developed in the darkest season of their life.
Maybe it's a family member who got out of a toxic situation but is still flinching at everything, still bracing for the worst, still convinced that they don't deserve good things. Maybe, and this is for you to sit with right now. Maybe it's you. You made it through. You're out of the tomb, but something is still wrapped around you. Something is still constricting you. And here's what I want to say in both situations. The unbinding is not a solo project. You weren't designed to unwrap yourself alone. There's a reason Jesus turned to the community. There's a reason the grave clothes were required. There's a reason those grave clothes required other hands to unbind them. Some things we genuinely cannot remove from ourselves. We need people. We need community. We need someone to help us see the cloth that's still on us, still tying us up. Because sometimes we've been wearing it so long that we forget that it's there. You learn to work around it. You just start to ignore it. And we need each other for that. And if there's someone in your life who's still wrapped, friend, I'm telling you right now, you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, maybe don't have answers at all. You don't have to fix them. That's not your job. You don't have to say the perfect thing. You just have to stay. Stay with them. Listen. You have to show up. You see, you have to be willing to sit with someone in the mess long enough to help them find their way out of the clothes, to unbind them. That's the call Jesus sends to all of us. So let me bring this home. The resurrection of Lazarus did not end at the tomb. It continued in the hands of the community. Hands unwrapping the cloth, hands removing what death left behind, hands restoring what grief had taken. And I think that's what resurrection looks like most of the time. Not a single dramatic moment, but a long, slow communal process of staying, of showing up, of refusing to leave people wrapped in what almost destroyed them, and of letting people help unwrap us. Again, friend, you know that resurrection is never a solo act. So here's my question for you this week. And I mean this as a real question, something to actually sit with. Who in your life needs help being unbound? And maybe that's not the hardest question. Maybe this is the hardest question for this week. What in your own life are you still carrying from the tomb? What part of the grave is still attached to you? And who do you trust enough to help you remove it? That's the work this week. That's the practice. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, daily thing. It's done in community. You can't do it alone, and you don't have to do it alone. So thanks for listening to this part of our Unlearning Empire series. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Not to convert them, but just because sometimes the story lands different when someone you trust sends it to you. Take care of each other. Unbind one another. Thank you so much. God bless, and we'll see you next week.